Hi there, Paul, Zuva began. Zefunde Mnyarazi responded as he settled down to listen to the story. Let me tell you the story of a queen who fell in love with a commoner, Zuva said. A long time ago, in a kingdom named Gara, a girl returned from another far-off kingdom to claim her royal title. After her mother had been banished for falling pregnant out of wedlock, the girl had been born in a forest, with the young mother subsequently abandoning the baby on a forest path. The girl was then picked up and raised in a village by a grandmother whose kindness had nurtured not just the girl, but also the girl's cousins. But after a severe famine had hit the land, the girl had met her biological mother in the forest, and the mother had alerted her daughter of her royal ties. The girl Rashai, together with her newly reconciled mother Mucha and her cousins Revai and Mosha and the rest of the famine-struck village, had then travelled back to Gara, and Rashai had to prove her ties to royalty by seeking and finding the enchanted emblems of the kingdom, the elephant tusk, the golden bangle, and the royal whistle. But even after finding the artifacts, her coronation to queenship had not been instant. The strongly traditional kingdom was against having a female leader, and the people approached the royal council to air their views. It's an abomination, us having a queen, an elderly male complainant said. The ancestors will be angry. We will not get any rain for choosing someone who should be bearing kids and strengthening the family name. If she becomes queen, a young woman who had also come to complain said, then we might as well go and hunt while the men stay at home, cook and clean our homes, and take care of the children. Who will marry her? A young man said as he complained. Who will have the guts to go up to a queen and say, hey, I like you, let's get married, huh? And the bloodline? An advisor in the king's advisory council said, we will be tainting the royal Gara bloodline, as the children she will bear will be the men's and not hers. And what will happen to the kingdom? I say we give her a position of leadership in the kingdom, just to show that we respect her as the eldest daughter of the late king, another advisor said. Then we will make her brother king, as we had already planned before she came back from the land of the banished. Before Rashai had returned, her brother Mutongi, the known son of the late King Mambogara, had been destined for kingship and had undergone all the initiations and training for kingship. There were northern murmurs of assent from several of the advisors after this suggestion. It is a great idea, another advisor said. We could offer her a seat here in the advisory council, make her the first and only woman, but it will still be an esteemed position. More advisors nodded, agreeing to the suggestion. But a young advisor named Diwai raised his hand timidly. He was the youngest and least experienced advisor in the room, and it scared him, having to stand before men older than his father and grandfather. Diwai was also scared because he was the only commoner in the room, as he came from a family of peasant farmers, whereas all the other advisors either came from the distinguished homes or were advisors through kinship to the Gara tribe. But it was his wisdom and astuteness that had earned him a home within the advisory council. As a young boy of turn, he had invented a farming implement that had gone on to change the lives of the people within the village. Because his family lived off subsistence farming, it had meant that they would be in the fields daily from morning till evening, with rest only being experienced on the sanctioned day of rest, the Chisi. One evening, as the rest of the family slept, he had used the bark of the muvuzi tree to tie up all the hoes in the homestead, adjusting the bark until he could use all the hoes at once with just one dig. The harrow, as he had gone on to name the implement, had gone on to become a favorite among the farmers as the time they spent in the fields was cut short and the boy became popular in the kingdom and beyond. But it was the role that he had played as a boy of 17 in single-handedly ending a war between Gara and its two neighbors that had gone on to earn him more respect. Gara then was being ruled by a cruel king who had no regard for his subjects. One of the king's favorite pastimes had been hunting down the maidens of the village and then using them for his pleasure, until parents began to hide their daughters in nearby kingdoms to protect them. But the king's tentacles had reached the neighboring lands, and he captured the daughters of the families within the kingdom rather than the confiscated maidens. When the two neighbors decided to take up arms, Liwai had secretly approached the leaders of the kingdoms and told them that a war would be costly for all the parties and that his kingdom Gara would suffer the worst. He had urged the leaders to safeguard entry into the kingdoms and capture those who tried to enter by force and sentence them by the laws of the land rather than laws that would lead to bloodshed and be costly for all kingdoms concerned. While the incumbent king had not credited Liwai for his role in brokering peace, the rest of the kingdom had noted the boy's bravery and wisdom and had rewarded him with a seat in the advisory council after the king's death and as soon as he came of age. Now, as he raised his hand to help solve the conundrum the kingdom was facing, his heart was beating fast. He was good with one-on-one conversations and struggled to speak to crowds. But the chief advisor, Jere, had seen his raised hand, and he gave the young man the platform to speak. "My elders," Liwai said, "all your concerns are valid, but they ignore one crucial aspect, that the queen was ordained by the ancestors, for had they not, she would not have found the artifacts. If we do not give her the throne, I for one fear the wrath of the ancestors. Also, my elders, I want you to consider the timing of her arrival in Gara. She could have chosen any day to come here, but she arrived just before a new, albeit illegitimate king was crowned. If that does not communicate anything to us as the advisors, then we might as well be leading this kingdom to doom." The young man paused, and the room remained rapt as they took in all he said. He continued, "My suggestion, therefore, my elders, is that we go ahead and crown the queen, and we do so with confidence, promising the kingdom that we will advise her in all she does so that the almighty Gara remains strong. We will also have to play a role in engendering acceptability of the new queen amongst the populace. Then lastly, to ensure that the kingdom of Gara remains strong, I suggest that we pair her off with a prince from another royal kingdom surrounding us, so that whatever offspring she has will be of undiluted royal blood and can therefore inherit the throne." Liwai sat down. For a while, not a murmur was heard throughout the room as people digested the young advisor's words. Then an elderly man broke the silence and laughed. "So much wisdom in one so young," he said. "The kingdom is in safe hands with you for generations to come." The other elders laughed too. So it was decided the new queen had to be crowned, but before that, she would have to go through the initiation processes that were reserved for kings and now the queen. The elders also agreed that since the girl had not been raised in the kingdom, she would have to be taught various Gara customs, and advisors were given different responsibilities that would help the girl acquaint with their customs and thus her subjects to be. The young queen-to-be Rashai took to initiation like a queen who was ready to lead. The chief war leader took her to the forest to teach her how to handle weapons, but Rashai had had that training with her brother Mosha back in their village. Rashai was patient as she listened to the man tell her all about weaponry and how each weapon was handled. He then asked, bowing, "My queen, which weapon do you want us to start with?" After he had showed her all the weapons, the young queen chose the bow and arrow and watched as the chief war leader set a target on a nearby tree for her to attempt to hit. But the young queen hit the target before obliterating it to dust, much to the amazement of the war leader. The girl showed off all her skills with all the other weapons, and the instructor simply stood there watching in awe, as he had never seen a woman as skilled in weaponry as this one. The young queen also absorbed the lessons in Gara customs like dry land absorbed water. Every evening, she sat with the chief customary and religious leader and the custodian of Gara tradition, Mbuya, and learnt what was sacred and what was not, what was important and what was not, and who had superiority in the village and who did not. Every day they would welcome important people into her courts, and she would learn what their role was in the kingdom. She was also taken on tours around the kingdom to learn the important and sacred sides of the kingdom, and in marketplaces she would stop to greet the commoners and the children, much to the chagrin of her aides and her instructors. Soon enough, however, coronation day came, and the crown was placed on her head to signify the new seat she would now occupy. Her first act as queen had been to pardon the band of renegades, the lost tribe of Gara, who had fled their land after the cruel king had sought to kill them. She also welcomed the villagers who had come with her into the kingdom, instructing her aides to find them a piece of land for her to settle in. She gave your mother some leave to go back and revive your old home. The advisory council had then asked her what would be done to her half-brothers and whether they had to be moved out of the royal compound, but Rashai was adamant that they stay. "They might not have received my entrance into the kingdom well," Rashai said, remembering how the eldest Prince Mutongi had claimed he was the king with fake emblems. "But they are still a part of the royal family, and this is the only home that they have known. If land can be cleared and a new home be created for me on the eastern side of the royal courtyard, that will be enough for me." So a new home was created for her, and she moved in with her brother and sister, Moswa and Revai. But it was with the people of Gara that she struggled to find acceptance. "She is too young," they said. "She is too pretty," others said. "She is a mere girl. We can't listen to a girl. Imagine grown men like us listening to a slip of a girl and her commands? Huh? No, never." And no matter what she did and what she said, there was a lack of respect for her within the kingdom. She went back to the advisors and sought help on what she had to do to gain acceptability, and she organized social events and fairs, took part in community events, and tried as hard as she could to assimilate with the commoners, and still nothing changed. One early morning, after a restless night, she gave her aides the slip and ran into the forest alone. Ever since she had become queen, she had always been surrounded by people, aides to help her bath and dress, her siblings to dine with, more aides to walk with her as she carried out her duties around the compound and in the kingdom, more people in the court sessions held on designated days in the royal courtyard, advisors seeking go-ahead on one community scheme or another, and more advisors to tell her what to do to gain the trust of the villagers. There were voices in her ear every day to the extent that her ears had a constant ring to them, and at night, once she was alone in her bedchamber, her own voice would also begin to torment her. "Was it worth it for you to come back here?" it asked. "What was the point of you becoming a queen when no one listens, when no one likes you?" And the voice would ask the same rhetorical questions over and over again, taunting her her and not allowing her to sleep. So this early morning, as her feet soaked the early morning dew, and she listened to the retreating catcalls of the cicadas, and as the day got brighter and brighter, she was relieved to be rid of the voices forever around her. She allowed her feet to take her wherever they allowed her, taking in deep breaths to inhale the scent of the earth. She walked for a while until she reached the bubbling river that sped across the forest on a mission to some far-away land. It was a beautiful sight before her, and she wondered when last she had seen water so happy as she had left a famine-struck land. She sped to the river, and at the edge of the bank bent down, scooped some water, and splashed it on her face, feeling its refreshing cool in the depths of her turbulent soul. But a twig snapped before her, and she jumped, turning around. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw it. A hyena, its fangs bared and its eyes bloodshot, looking straight at her. Slowly, gingerly, Rashai felt her waist for her spear and realized in shock she was weaponless. She had simply walked out of the village unarmed, and now here she was, not even 3 moons after her coronation, facing death in her face. Her pain hit even harder when she realized no one in the kingdom would even know what had happened to their queen, and worse still, no one would miss her. The hyena sidled closer, testing the young woman to see if she would fight back, but Rashai remained frozen to the spot. It took another step closer, then another step, until she could feel its hot breath on her body, and Rashai closed her eyes and waited. But then she heard a thwack, and the beast groaned, and she heard it thud to the ground. She opened her eyes and looked up and down, and saw an arrow piercing the beast's body and a pool of blood gushing out of it. She looked up, and her eyes met those of the youngest advisor in her royal council. "My queen," Liwai said, stepping over the beast, coming to stand before Rashai and bowing. "I saw you enter the forest without a weapon as I was doing my daily morning walk. I noticed you were alone and you didn't have your aides with you, so I decided to follow you to give you some protection." But Rashai was too stunned to speak. Her heart was beating so fast, she was struggling to breathe. All that was in her mind was how near death the experience had been for her. Iwai, realizing how shaken the queen was, offered her his hand, and instinctively she took it, allowing him to lead her to a boulder where he gently guided her to sit down. He sat down too, sitting next to her. It was a while before she spoke again, and all that came out was a feeble "thank you." Liwai nodded and said, "My queen, I do hope the next time you come into the forest, you will carry with you weaponry. It is dangerous in here, and who knows what will happen when you are alone." Rashai nodded too and said, "I will try to do better." "If you do not mind me asking," Liwai continued, "why did you leave the kingdom without your aides?" Rashai's response was a barrage of tears that flowed down her cheeks and body heaves that wrecked her body as she sobbed. She tried to stem the flow of tears with her palm, but the river that sped past seemed to have lodged in her tear ducts. It was like a purge of the fear, the self-doubt, and the feelings of inadequacy that had resided in her since her coronation. Liwai was at a loss. All his wisdom had never told him what to do when he saw a queen crying, but as the beautiful young woman before him continued to weep, he knew he could not just stand there. So he took her hand in his and moved closer to pat her back gently until at last, as the sun's early rays began to dance on the water that ran past, she quietened. He stepped back as she took one last heave, and he asked her, "My queen, are you all right?" She wiped her face with her palms and she shook her head. "I am overwhelmed," she said. Then, noticing the openness in his face, she continued to tell him all her fears and doubts and how she was beginning to feel the heaviness of the crown that sit on your head. This was not how I expected it would be, she finished. The young man nodded and said, Every crown is heavy, my queen. Your role is to make everyone happy, yet everyone has different needs. If you seek to please all the people you lead, then your crown will be heavier. Then what do I do? She asked, her voice still shaky and hoarse from the crying. Be fair, my queen. What you do for the left hand, be sure you also do for the right hand, and vice versa. It's not enough. I'm trying, she said, but it's not enough. The young advisor nodded, then said, My queen, allow me to say something that you might not be comfortable hearing, but somebody has to tell you. Rashai nodded. Diwai continued, My queen, your efforts are not enough for the people because they are afraid you will leave. You arrived in the kingdom like a whirlwind and settled on us like a dust. The people are concerned you will leave in the same manner too, that one night they will sleep and the next they will be queenless. My queen, you are also young and you shall marry and perhaps leave the kingdom. Now the people will wonder what will happen then and thus refuse to form an attachment with you because they are uncertain about you. As Liwai spoke, Rashai was looking at him intently. She had seen him in the council before, and she knew that he was a commoner, despite his advisor status, as he had no cane that all the important men in the village had. In all the councils she had also attended, she had never heard him speak. He just sat in his corner and kept to himself. But now as he spoke, she was in awe of his quiet, calm voice that didn't fight aggressively to be heard, but that blended easily in nature. She looked carefully at him for the first time, taking in the tufts of hair that sat gracefully on his well-developed jawline, the chiseled features of his face, and the eyes that smiled easily. All her life, she had never looked at a boy and liked him, but now as she watched his mouth move and heard the words flow out of it, a sharp pang hit her stomach. She did not realize he finished speaking until he cleared his throat and probed lightly. My queen. Startled, she scrambled to remember what he had been saying, and remembering just in the nick of time, she said, I do not wish to marry. Diwai chuckled and said, My queen, I am afraid you have little say in that. Like it or not, you shall have to marry. What if I cannot find a suitor? Rashai asked. My queen, I do not think it will be up to you to find a suitor. You cannot marry any man, and this is because of the heavy yoke that you carry as both present queen and the bearer of future leaders. The advisors will have to find you a royal match to further strengthen the name of Gara. Rashai chuckled humorlessly. So not only do I have to get married, I have to marry a man I might not like? Diwai shrugged, then nodded. It will be a marriage of convenience. She was quiet for a while, then said, What a heavy crown indeed. From not being liked by the people you lead to possibly not liking the man you will marry. She sighed, then in a small voice said, Sometimes I wish I had not come back here. Liwai smiled slightly, then took her hand in his. Well, it wasn't your choice to make, he said. Fate brought you back to your seat. Then you dropped your hand and looked up at the sun that now shone proudly across a clear sky. It is getting late, my queen. You will now have to return home or your people will worry. They walked back home quietly, Liwai walking one step behind. No matter the number of times Rashai tried to slow down and measure step with his, she knew he had to follow behind her as she was the queen, the leader, the ruler, and she had to be in control of all situations. She also knew he was protecting her from any unknown human or animal assailants that could attack her from the back, and this thoughtfulness awed her. As they walked, she couldn't help but be taken in by his aura, his presence, and his inborn authority. She could not deny that he was a natural-born leader, even though he was content to lead by his presence and not his voice. It doesn't help that he's good-looking too, she thought to herself and smiled, before another sharp pang of longing hit her stomach, and she quickly chided herself for engaging in girly behavior when she was a queen. That afternoon, they had an advisory council meeting in the council hut, and Rashai felt another pang in her stomach when she saw Diwayi again. She tried to catch his eye as he came in, but he kept his face averted, and even during the meeting, not once did he look in her direction. Rashai tried as hard as she could to not only concentrate during the meeting, but to also keep at bay the little heartbreak she felt. She watched as man after man stood to either give a report or pose a question that would be debated in the next meeting, but her mind was by a riverside boulder, mulling over his voice, his face, his scent, his wisdom. She was so in her mind that she did not notice the moment he stood before the council and bowed before her. She was jolted back to reality when she heard his voice say, "My queen, honorary members of the advisory council, I bring before you a matter that was discussed in a previous council, the issue of a suitor for our queen. I believe that some of us here have noticed the Queen's failure to assimilate into Gara effectively, and I believe that people do not see her reign as permanent. I therefore propose that the Council begin its search for a royal suitor for the Queen to further strengthen her legitimacy and thus endear her to Gara." The young Queen sighed, then shook her head out of her fantasy. She listened as the advisors debated on which kingdom an alliance would be possible, and when they at last settled on two kingdoms, they instructed Diwayi to assemble a team with which he would travel into the kingdoms and thus seek courtship, a task which Diwayi eagerly accepted, and this again brought a sharp pang to Rashai's heart. That night, as she slept, her mind roved back to the young advisor and their conversation by the river, and it was her last thought before she slept. But even in sleep, the young advisor continued to torment her dreams, and she dreamed of their wedding day, a happy affair, but there were no attendees, no marriage officiant, no family members to celebrate their union. That did not stop her from visiting the river and the boulder when she awoke, hoping that she would see him as he was on his early morning walk. But she sat and sat and sat, and he did not come. She came back alone all week long, carrying her weapons in case of an emergency, and still she did not see him. Yet, unbeknownst to her, he followed her every morning, walking so carefully he would not step on anything underfoot that would give him away, watching the beautiful, sad queen with a longing he knew would be criminal to pursue or fulfill. Diwayi had noticed the young queen the day she had strode into the kingdom with a small army at her behest, declaring her title to royalty. That first night, and every night after, as his loins stirred, they would be accompanied by the thoughts of the beautiful king who was beyond his reach. The morning of their encounter by the riverside, his intention had been merely to protect the young woman, and had it not been for the hyena, she would never have guessed of his presence. Yet now they had met, and he had opened a door to a portal he knew he could not visit. He knew that if he sought to spend more time with her, he would only hurt himself in the process. He was a commoner, and she was the queen. A relationship between them would be an abomination. So he would lie to himself as he watched her sitting by the boulders that the only reason he had followed her was because he wanted to protect her from the unseen forces of the forest, rather than because he liked her more than he should. When Rashai saw him next, however, it was at the weekly advisory council, and he announced he had assembled a team and would be leaving for the kingdom the following day. Again, he averted his gaze, and not once did he look at her. At home, Rashai longed to tell her sister Revai of the desire to see the young man again and spend time with him, but she knew Revai was too judgmental and would laugh at someone with the role of the queen falling for a mere commoner from a peasant family. So she kept her desires to herself and waited for him to come back. Even in his absence, she continued her daily visits to the river and would sit on the border, trying to recapture the essence of the conversation they had had on the day they had set that first morning, wondering how the conversation would have gone had she been a commoner. One such morning, as she sat on a boulder, she chuckled to herself as she thought how since her first encounter with Diwai here, she had not thought of the kingdom and of its subjects and their failure to welcome her into their bosoms. And without this thought weighing her down, she felt at peace. But a voice disturbed her out of her reverie, and she jumped. And why would my queen be smiling this early morning? The quiet, deep voice asked. Rashai instantly recognized the voice and she looked up, her smile growing wider. When did you get back? She asked, barely keeping the excitement out of her voice. Early this morning, Liwai said, just in time to see you slipping into the forest again. He came to sit next to her and said, your excitement is contagious. I hope you will like the gift I brought you. What gift? Rashai asked, her mind instantly thinking of a trinket. But Liwai said, your suitor, effectively dampening the young queen's spirits. I don't want to talk about him, she said at last. How have you been? Iwai sank down on a boulder and they talked of his journey, of the perils he met on his ways, of the organizations of the other kingdoms. It was such an insightful journey, he concluded. Rashai heard him, but did not attempt to listen to what he was saying, instead reveling in the cadence of his voice, the rasp in his throat, and his quiet presence that seemed to take up all the air until she was left breathless. When finally the sun had started its decided rise in the east, Liwai said, we need to get back, my queen, before people begin to worry. Rashai nodded, and before she could control her tongue, she said, it was great seeing you today, Liwai. I had really missed you. And as the impact of the words hit both of them, they both blushed. I had missed you too. Liwai responded in a small voice as he helped her down the boulder, and they began their silent walk home with mismatched steps. As they got closer to the kingdom, Rashai abruptly stopped and turned to look at the young man. Will I see you again? She asked. Of course, he wanted to say, you will see me in the advisory council, but he knew that was not the question he had been asked, so he took a deep breath and said, I do not know, my queen. Today you shall meet the royal prince, your husband-to-be, and you shall become betrothed. From there, preparations for your upcoming marriage will commence. But Rashai pretended like she had not heard what he said, and she said, I will be sitting by the river every morning, and she darted into the village and to the royal courtyard. By mid-morning, the courtyard was abuzz with preparations for the meeting with the prince. The cooks roasted and fried and boiled dish after dish until aromas of food fought for prominence in the sky. A hairstylist worked on the kinks and curls on the queen's head until they sat like a crown atop her head. A groomer helped her with the aloe vera and scented flower potion that made her skin glow and her body ooze a scent so delectable each two could be eaten. Revai helped her choose a beautiful dress, and she chose the heaviest crown to ensure the royal prince knew who he was dining with. That afternoon, Rashai sat in the royal dining room with Revai and Mosra, and they awaited the entrance of the royal prince, Revai fidgeting in his seat, whispering to his sister, I hope the prince brought an unmarried brother, and both you and I can be married to brothers, to which Rashai rolled her eyes. Just then, a commotion sounded outward, and there was a flurry of greetings from the aides before a light knock was rapped on the dining room door. An aide opened the door, and Rashai and their siblings stood to greet the visitors. For a moment, Rashai was taken aback as only three men entered: the chief advisor Jerry, the young advisor Diwai, and an older white-haired bejeweled man. Where was the prince she was to be betrothed to? But Revai was already giggling beside her and saying under her breath, "Is that the prince, the old man?" before giggling harder yet quietly again. It was a strained meal. The bejeweled man was shown to a seat next to Rashai, and there was so much Rashai could do to hide her revulsion. She wanted to run away and hide. If this was what being a queen meant, she didn't want to be a queen. An old man? Where had he been when others his age were marrying? Considering that there were plenty of women looking for some secure and important men to marry them, why was this man untethered? Why did it feel like she had been given something nobody else wanted? What made her situation worse was that she was sitting directly opposite Iwai. Not once since he came into the room had he even looked in a direction, instead choosing to dig into the food before him and engaging in conversation with Mosha sitting beside him. The chief advisor Jerry also did not help matters, continuously telling the young queen of the potential of Gara expansion into the prince's kingdom as they were in need of a strong alliance. "The ball is in your court too," the chief advisor said. "It's up to you now to decide on the day of marriage, and we hope it is not too far a date. Then the union will be complete." Diwai was nodding and added, "A quick marriage will communicate to the people of Gara that you're not flighty and would thus help to engender acceptability and make your reign easier." Rashai gaped at him and for a moment was tempted to throw the leg of a turkey she had in her hands straight into his face. Meanwhile, beside her, Revai continued to snort and chortle and giggle under her breath, saying, an old man for a husband." Beside her also, the old man prince continued to chew loudly, smacking his lips and licking his fingers, oblivious to the conversation around him. "I will let you know of the date of marriage," Rashai said finally to the chief advisors, "soon." That night, as she slept, Rashai dreamt again of the boulder by the river. But instead of Iwai sitting there, it was the bejeweled man who sat with Rashai, and she woke up abruptly as though it were a nightmare. Early the next morning, Rashai stole again into the forest alone. She sat on the boulder waiting, praying that he would turn up, and eventually he did, and there was a sad look on his face. "You know I can't let you walk in the forest alone," he said. But she did not hear him, because she had leapt at him and begun to pound on his chest with her fists in fury. He tried to hold her wrist, but so great was her wrath and strength that he could not stem it, so he let her, hoping that this would be a catharsis for him too, and he would feel better after she was done and tired, and would be easier to let her go and stop thinking of her. When finally she tired, she looked into his face and asked, "Of all the men in the world, of all the royal princes in the adjacent kingdoms, you brought me an old man." "An old man, Iwai?" He sighed. "He was the only one available," he sighed again. "And look at it this way, he has never married, never had children, so you will never worry about other children coming back here to claim your throne." "Return him," she said. "Take him back. As your queen, I command you to return him." Iwai took a deep breath. "My queen," he said, "I am sorry, but I cannot return him. We have already promised them marriage, and if it does not happen, we may be caught in conflict, and perhaps inadvertently start a war." He took her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "My queen," his voice was softer now, "remember why you are doing this. Remember that the kingdom will benefit from your selflessness." She knew he was right, but still, she said in a small voice, "I don't want him. I want you." It was on the tip of his tongue to also say, I want you to, but he stopped himself just in time. He did not want to fan the flames of hope, so he said, It is impossible, my queen. Our ranks do not allow that. A commoner like me cannot strengthen your family name. Now all you have to do is set the date for the wedding celebrations and give the people of Gara something to look forward to. But Rashai set no conclusive date, saying first they would wait for the rainy season to end, then the harvest season, then the winter, then the spring, then another rainy season to begin. The advisory council grew agitated with her, but they could do nothing to force her as she simply told them, I am the queen. I will make the decision when the time is right for me. And yet, every morning, she would go to the river, and as always, Liwai would show himself. Sometimes they spoke of the current state of the kingdom. Sometimes Liwai would give her pointers on what laws and rules to suggest to the council, or what to do to further engender acceptability in the kingdom. Sometimes they would just sit there, spending half an hour watching the sunrise and saying nothing to each other at all. Once, when Liwai had attempted to ask when the wedding would be, Rashai had quickly cut him off, and the subject had never been broached again. But despite meeting each other every morning for almost a year, they never spoke about their true feelings to each other. Rashai did not tell him that she dreamt of him every night. She did not tell him of the fantasies she had daily of what it would be like once they married and the kingdom accepted their union. She did not tell him that she craved his voice, his scent, his laughter, and even his silences during the day and at night when she was away from him. So she would just sit there and allow herself to simply be in his presence. Liwai too could not tell her of how deeply he had fallen for her, and how sometimes in his moments of dejection with the way the people in the kingdom treated her, he had wanted to encourage her to run away with him so they could start a new life somewhere. He knew that his desire for her would not bear any fruit, and so he allowed himself to enjoy the few unadulterated moments that they spent together in the mornings. Rashai, in the months of indecisiveness, continued to court the elderly prince, taking him to events in the kingdom, dining with him in the presence of her aides, and including him in some royal discussions. Revai continued to laugh and snigger whenever she saw the old man, telling her sister that being single was better than being with an old man, before roaring with laughter again. A year after Rashai's engagement, however, the winds of change blew into Gara. One afternoon, a messenger rushed into the kingdom, sitting astride a donkey and breathless. He headed straight for the queen's court, where she was adjudicating a dispute, and fell onto her knees. When he had sufficiently regained his breath, he said in a rushed voice, The prince, summoned to take position as king, his brother the king, fell asleep, didn't wake up. The king's sons have refused to lead and rule. The prince, he is next in line. Rashai quickly summoned the advisory council and told them what had happened. They were excited and began to speak over each other. The queen has to marry him soon, one advisor said. Yes, another spoke up. The marriage will lead to the easier consolidation of the two kingdoms. Another spoke up too. Yes, and Gara will reign supreme. Rashai was alarmed. Now the marriage she had dithered over would be sped up. But when they called the prince and the now rested messenger relayed the message to him, his face too had lit up with excitement. Oh, I never thought I would become king, he said. My brother and his sons were the true heirs, and now in my old age I get to lead. My queen, he turned to Rashai, here is my proposal. We consolidate our kingdoms, and I become the king and ruler of both kingdoms. The advisors gasped. They could not bear to lose their kingdom, so they bade the old prince, who was now the new king, farewell, and sent him on his way with some aids. The next morning, when Liwai arrived by the riverside, he found Rashai pacing, agitated. He came to stand before her, taking her hands in his and stalling her. "What is wrong, my queen?" he asked. "Shouldn't you be happy that the prince is gone?" "He is gone, but I'm still unmarried," she cried out. "Now the advisors will send you back on another trip to find me another royal tie." He smiled, then said, "Not unless you use your powers to convince them to marry a commoner. You are a queen after all, and you managed to stall your marriage. Surely there is a way to talk to the elders and tell them you can marry whoever you want." She looked at him and smiled too. "It is a pity I know of no commoner who wants to marry me." Liwai smiled at her and led her to their boulder. Then sitting, he looked into her eyes and said, "Not even this poor commoner?" he asked, petting his chest. She shrugged, looking back at him. Then his face turned solemn again, and still looking at her, he poured his heart out. "You are the woman I've always wanted to meet, to marry," he finished. "But I knew once you became queen that you would be too far high up for me to marry. But now, my queen, my love, if you could take pity of this poor no-name man and make him happy by agreeing to marry him, then this man promises you nothing but peace all the days of your life." Rashai was silent for a while, looking into his eyes. Then he said, "Please marry me, my love." Rashai nodded, and beaming, she fell into his outstretched arms. "I thought you would never ask. I have waited for you all this while, and I'm happy that you have asked me now." But in the kingdom, an emergency council meeting was called later that afternoon, and as if they knew what had transpired by the river, the elders begged Rashai to marry. "My queen," Chief Advisor Jerry said, "the kingdom needs stability, but we will not rest until they are certain that you are indeed one of us and you will not marry into another kingdom, leaving us in a state of anarchy." Rashai spoke up. "I too long to marry and give Gara heirs, but there is no royal tie around, and thus me marrying someone will prove to be difficult. It is a pity that I cannot marry a commoner." As she said this, she tried hard not to look at Liwai. Chief Advisor Jerry spoke up again. "My queen, it seems that we have limited options available to us. Is there any specific commoner or family you would like to marry into? Please bear in mind that the more important the family you will marry into is, the easier it will be for Gara to accept your marriage." Rashai shook her head and said, "I have no specific family and I have no specific guy, but I trust this council will use its wisdom to help me find someone who is wise, who loves this kingdom and is willing to put it first, and who knows the kingdom in and out so that they will help me in its administration." She rose. "I will leave you all to it, in the hope that you will make a choice that is best for Gara." She retreated to her royal chambers where she lay on her bed, her stomach churning with both excitement and trepidation, her heart alternating with both fear and hope, and her mind praying for the best. As the sun set, there was a knock on her door, and Revai entered, a smile coloring her beautiful face. "Your husband-to-be is here to see you, my queen," she said, bowing down. Rashai ran out of her bedchambers and found Liwai standing in the lounge, and when he saw her, his face opened up, beaming, and he spread his arms wide, and for a moment she forgot she was a queen as she hurled into his arms, and they embraced with all the passion they had held within themselves for all the moons they had met every morning by the river. The end. Both Mirazi and Zuva were smiling. "I am glad that you finally became queen and all your dreams were fulfilled," Mirazi said. "Did the people eventually accept her?" Zuva smiled. "You will know next week when you hear Revai's story." The real end. Thank you once again for coming to my channel and listening to this and the other stories here. I appreciate that love that you all have been showing me through your comments, your shares, your likes, and thank you for all of that. The Zuva series is almost at the end, and I would like to hear from you which story so far has held your heart and the one that you believe might not have been so good. Also, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one. Love you, Lord. Bye.